when it comes to reforming the backstop, probably because the Maybot doesn't know what could pass muster with her own MPs. It's not clear if there's a majority in the Commons for anything to do with Brexit, and the Campbell-Grayling Adonis squeeze of putting the whole caboodle back to the people, well, there's not a majority for that in the Commons either. So what to do other than binge on Netflix? Some folks are talking about a People's Assembly, giving the public direct control of this Brexit business. Here's Labour MP Stella Creasy with a take of the week.
Another week, more votes on Brexit. Whilst the writing constantly seems to be on the wall for Theresa May's plan, Parliament squabbles and the clock ticks down. Let's face it, the Brexit process has become unspeakably awful, like a foul smell stinking up our democracy. And as medicines continue to be stockpiled, jobs continue to be lost, it doesn't look like there's a majority for any outcome or even a process to move us forward. But it doesn't have to be this way. There is the possibility of light at the end of the tunnel. Now is the time for the UK to hold a Citizens Assembly to help decide the fate of Brexit. Involving the public in grown-up, meaningful decision-making within a parliamentary democracy works all the time in other countries. In Ireland, decades of intransigence on abortion and same-sex marriage was solved by citizens' assemblies. The model works in other countries too, in Iceland, in Canada, in Australia, in Poland, even in France. Citizens' assemblies frame better debates. They disrupt all the bad habits of politics that have come to characterise the Brexit discussions, kicking issues into the long grass, putting party interest over national interest, assuming the public are too stupid to cope with hard choices. Citizens' Assemblies use 250 people of all backgrounds and all ages from across the country to look at the options on the table and give feedback to politicians. They don't mean that politicians get to escape difficult choices. We'd still retain the final say, but we'd know what the public think of the options in front of us. We're all desperate for Parliament to make progress on Brexit, but in the absence of any superheroes like that, it's time we ask the public to help break the gridlock.
Stella's with us now. Welcome to the programme. Thank you for that take. Michael, People's Assemblies, or Assembly, is a way to get through the Brexit morass, which Parliament seems incapable of doing?
Well, Stella talks about consulting the people. She talks about getting 250 people together. But actually, we already asked 32 million people, and they gave us a verdict. Week after week, someone appears on this sofa trying to find some alternative to the referendum, trying to find some alternative to a thorough-going democratic process which has already been enacted and celebrated. No self-respecting opinion poll would work on a sample of 250 people. I wouldn't trust your 250 people for anything. But if you don't like referendums, then we have another system which is honoured by time, which is the election of 650 members of Parliament by the British public. Now, the merit of these people is that they're people who have thought about politics so much that they wanted to offer themselves for public office, and have then devoted much of their time to thinking about public issues. They've had to become quite well informed. They've had to debate with each other. The corners have been knocked off them in public debate. So members of Parliament are quite qualified. I think we ought to trust our parliamentary system. But, you know, either go with a referendum or go with Parliament. But what, an opinion poll of 250 people? No.
All right.
Please.
I'm going to come to Alan in a minute, but I'll let you respond to that right away.
No, and it's interesting you say that, Michael, because it's not an opinion poll. It's like a jury. It's a randomly selected group
group of people to hear what they have to say. I love that you think that politicians are eminently qualified, but I don't think that just because I've been elected, that means that nobody else's opinion on all of this is important. The problem right now is that every single campaign will tell you, whether they're Brexiteers or the People's Vote or anyone in between, that they know what the will of the public is on the options in front of us, when the truth is we don't know. So asking a representative sample of the British public is a way of complementing the decisions going on in Parliament. It's not an alternative. Parliamentary democracies around the world use citizens' assemblies, but what they do is they break all the bad habits I think you would also accept come with politics. All the game playing, kicking the can down the road, acting as if people are too stupid to do the job that we do and understand some of those issues. It's not an either or.
I'll come back to Michael, but let me hear from Alan.
Stella's a very eloquent advocate, but it doesn't persuade me, and it doesn't persuade me in the position we're in. I can kind of understand in Ireland with that sensitive moral issue about legalising gay marriage, from where Ireland has come from only very recently, that you would get some citizens together and, you know, the politicians should...
But in Ireland they did it before the referendum,
exactly,
not afterwards.
Exactly, that's my
point. The analogy is...
So in the mess at the moment, I heard someone, a taxi driver the other week, make a suggestion that all MPs should go down to Brighton, hold hands and walk into the sea singing Hare Krishna. That to me would be equally as sensible, I have to say, than getting 250 people together at the moment, at this particular juncture in this debate, and say this is where we're going to solve it for you.
Let's see if we can flesh this out a little bit, Stella. There'd only be one assembly.
Yes.
Okay.
I have to say in Ireland, look, people know about the one on same-sex marriage and they know that there's one on abortion. I have to say, if anybody thinks that Brexit is a difficult subject to find people who've got strongly opposing views together, they don't understand what it was like to talk about abortion in Ireland.
Right, but
they have also held them on climate change, on the ageing population. They've had them.
Where were they on climate change?
So they've held a citizens' assembly about what the Irish have.
Oh, the Irish
They actually have them as part of their parliamentary process.
What policy did that result in?
Oh, there's a whole series of recommendations that it's made, which aren't about referendums.
No.
So
but I'm just saying,
to do about carbon targets and things.
Irish policy was changes as a result?
Oh, lots. So they made a recommendation to the Dáil. So the government is looking...
Dáil.
The Dáil. I do beg your pardon. I've just got my head around Taoiseach, so apologies about this.
No, I know the problem. I still get my head around Parliament.
In Australia, they've used them to look at whether or not they should have nuclear waste disposal, and actually that decided in the end not to.
Right, but let's just...
So there would be sensitive moral issues. They have been used all around the world.
Yeah, but let's look at the mechanics, because it is interesting. And it's a new idea for this country. So there'd only be one assembly.
Yes.
There would be 250 people?
Yes.
How would they be chosen?
So it's a process called sortition. It's the same process that we use for jury selection. What you would do is pick 20,000 people from the electoral register. You would contact them. You would make sure that none of them were politicians or worked for political parties, so you'd strip the party politics out of it. You would then pull together an assembly of 250 people based on where they live, their age, their social class, their ethnicity, their gender, to represent and reflect the British public. Not the same as people who are elected. Being elected is a very important process. This is a separate complementary process to get the representative sample. Look, it's not the question time audience. It's not those people who will bother.
That's a representative sample.
It's not the same as the people who will put themselves forward. It is a genuinely representative random process in the same way that jury selection.
But it's not random. I can see the 20,000 people may be random.
Yes.
But you're then going to select 250.
So you select
That's not random.
You're
going to set criteria.
Yes.
By ethnic background, social class. So it's not random.
So it's random in the sense of it's not about the views that you hold, although I personally would test for how people voted in the referendum, not to get 50-50, but to make sure there was no bias in the audience.
What would they be asked to do, Stella?
So what we've been talking about, so some people have been talking about holding them to look at some very big questions behind Brexit, like immigration policy and regional disparities. What we've been talking about in Parliament is, could you look at what's been talked about in the EU withdrawal, at the different variations of options, and ask for some feedback on them? Not binary yes, no, but what do you think are the most important things? And then make recommendations. And the Irish wording is as they see fit to the parliamentarians. Parliamentarians retain the final say, but we might actually know what the public think. You know, people keep talking about things like Super Canada and Norway Plus. None of us actually know what the public think about any of those options.
Would they come to a consensus or would they come to a majority?
So the way that it's done is a deliberative process. So you would get a sense of their priorities. So it's less about yes, no to various options, but what they would say are the most important issues and the most important concerns that they have. It would also be facilitated. So even if you have somebody who has really strong views, there would be a facilitator around the table to make sure that everybody was heard.
Like a focus group.
No, it's a different process of facilitation, and
Oh,
I get
focus
this is
groups are
new for
facilitated.
people. Well, this is new for people because it's a
You
different
saw the
way of having a
focus group in
conversation.
the Brexit drama on Channel 4.
Forgive me, I didn't. I was probably sat in Parliament listening to the same
You'd
debate
have a look
happening
to see whether-
again and again and again.
To see whether this would be sweetness and light. Are you becoming more convinced, Michael?
I'm sorry to say that I am not. I mean, I think the position we're in is already complicated enough. I mean, that is to say, we've had a referendum result, and Parliament is being asked to adjudicate on what that might have meant. Parliament's going through a series of votes. I think it's applying a certain amount of understanding, depth of understanding, expertise to that. It's difficult for a majority for that to emerge. But even where a majority does emerge, we then have the difficulty that the European Union may not be
Sure.
in agreement. I really do not see how this this kind of public jury of 250 adds anything sensible or constructive.
And I understand it's difficult because it's new. It's not something we've seen at a national level.
Not because I have a fuddy-duddy, but because logically I don't see that it...
Well,
Tell me how
I'm sorry,
you
but
fuddy
I'm not.
but
I'm
I
not.
agree with
okay.
you.
No, he doesn't agree, but that's fine.
I'm
You're putting
certainly
your
not
case.
going to hold a poll.
Tell me how
Fuddy-duddy
these
or
people's assemblies work in France.
So actually what Macron is talking about doing is something slightly different. He's talking about holding multiple assemblies
Doing
around
it?
the country. Yes, and he started
Have you
to
seen
do
one?
them. No, again, I have to admit, I've been stuck in Parliament. I haven't been able to go over to France. but
Because you do mention, shall I tell you about it?
I would love to hear.
All right. He speaks for 3 hours non-stop. The audience is selected from mayors, regional officials, and party officials.
Sure,
The questions are pre-screened
sure.
to Mr. Macron. He won't answer questions in a number of areas, including the record of his rather dubious bodyguard who was found on the streets of Paris beating somebody up. And indeed, you can see how the audience is prepared on YouTube.
Sure.
People have YouTubed the preparations. Tell me again
So
how the National
That
Assemblies,
isn't
People's
that.
Assemblies
Well,
work.
that's not. So that's not.
You
a
cited that as an example.
I cited an example of where people are trying to bring the public into a discussion. You can also go on YouTube and look at all the citizens' assemblies from Ireland and look at all the evidence, all the testimony,
But
how they
Ireland
were put
seems
together.
to be your
So that is a
main-
different model.
Ireland seems to be your main case.
No, they've also used them in Canada, so they use them on electoral
Right.
form. They've used them in Australia at a
But
regional level.
again, in Canada, they use them in electoral form
Mm-hmm.
before the referendum,
Yeah.
not afterwards. Just give me, we're running out of time, but
it's a
it's a really
process.
interesting proposal, which is
Yeah.
why I'm wanting some facts
Yeah.
on this. What kind of proposal would the People's Assembly, because we're only going to have one, you say,
Yeah.
what
this,
kind of proposal would it come up with?
So, as I've said, I think it should look at what.
No, I know what to look
yeah,
at, but
sorry.
what kind of proposal would it come up with?
So it would make recommendations to Parliament.
No, I know what
on-
kind.
Well, it would come up with a report. That's what they did in Ireland.
Yeah, but give me an idea of what it might conclude and say to Parliament.
Well, I don't want to prejudge it. It would hear from everybody, but it would tell us, for example, where the British public are on the rules around what Super Canada might mean, or what they might think of the Norway model, or if they think actually this should go back to the public because this is so very different to what we thought we were going to get in the referendum. All the things that people are putting forward. No,
It's second referendum in disguise. God, I've been so
no,
stupid.
no.
I didn't.
Michael,
do you know, I
for
didn't
avoidance
spot it
of
till
doubt.
now. Second
For
referendum
avoidance
on
of
that
doubt, Michael,
sofa
I
once again.
absolutely no. I've been very clear. I don't think Brexit is a good idea, but I am prepared to listen to what Jacob Rees-Mogg would say to that assembly,
All right.
and ultimately it would make a decision independently of me. I'd only be able to give evidence. So it's a
Stella-
process, not an outcome,
Let-
but it's a process that gives you a sense of priorities of the different options.
I understand, assuming the 250 really are representative. But
Well,
let me-
they're not. It's not a citizens' assembly.
no, but I'm not quite sure where the tools exist to make 250 people really representative of this country. But that maybe could be worked out.
Yeah, you
Let me
can.
put a more general point
Sure.
to you just to finish off. Many people in this country think that our current politicians,
Mm-hmm.
on both sides of the aisle, are the lowest grade political class ever.
Yeah.
Ever. Your idea of an assembly, it just confirms that, doesn't it?
Well, no, I don't think that, but I think it is a recognition that Brexit is breaking our democracy. If you think that Citizens Assemblies demean traditional parliamentary democracy, then you must think that Justin Trudeau or Leo Varadkar, where they have used these as part of decision-making processes, have been demeaned as well. I don't think there's anything wrong with wanting to find a better, frankly, more grown-up way of having a conversation about some difficult choices in front of us.
I just think,
Final point.
for the sake of your Citizens Assembly idea, you shouldn't raise it now in this particular problem to solve this particular. It sounds like you're subcontracting it out, and it seems to me what we need and what the public wants is leadership, not another group of people saying what they think.
I'm going to show some leadership for a change by calling this to an end. Stella, thank you for coming on and explaining that.